Hi guys, Chrono here. So, I was working on a custom map a while back, and I sort of wanted to record the entire process, so from concept all the way to completion. What you're looking at right now is the concept phase. I'm working in Adobe Illustrator. I'm trying to first set up, a label, what I'm working on, and then a background for it, just so it looks visually interesting. I spend a little bit of time on trying to get this gradient right, but I'm not super picky about the color once I get the shape the way I want it. I was sort of inspired when I was making it by Cloud City in the Star Wars series and by Elysia on Metroid Prime 3. So this kind of floating city that's sort of a storage facility for something bigger. Old, rusty, outdated, hasn't been used in a while like Elysia is in Metroid Prime. Just kind of something different, kind of almost T-pile, if you want to think of it that way. So I started with this big central column, and then I wanted to make some bridges between that and some spawn points on the outside that were smaller. The spawn points ended up changing quite a bit. I wanted them to be symmetrical pretty early on, but I ended up failing pretty badly on actually making them symmetrical. In the very end of my video, when I'm starting to make those bridges between the center and the spawn islands, you can kind of see exactly how much I had to change in each bridge in order to get it to fit the next island. So there was a lot of difference between when between the sizes when I made them and when I finally finished them. Right now I've got basically the shape that I want down, so I'm going through and I'm labeling everything. I'm going to start coloring it here in a minute. I just want to sort of... I don't want to spend too long on this because I want to, make a 3D model. I want to get it into the game, but I also want to have a really solid reference for exactly where I want the armories to be, where I want the spawn points to be, what I want people to be able to see, right? I want both of the two main spawn islands to be able to see the other team's main spawn islands over sort of a sniper's outlook. I ended up getting rid of the bridge that I'm putting in here pretty soon. There was like a little outcropping that I wanted to have, but I ended up getting rid of that just because it didn't really fit in the model. There was no easy way to make it, and it looked alright the way it was, and I just kind of wanted to texture it. These right here, I ended up getting rid of these. I almost regret that, almost. Not enough to actually go back and fix them, but, that is what it is. And again, I'm going through just adding more labeling, more sort of what my thought process was at the time. Hopefully, future me will be able to figure out what it is I'm trying to accomplish with any given item. Right here, I really wanted to make it so that the sides of that center circle were open. I wanted those to be sort of hangars for a couple of aircraft. I spent far too long trying to get it right so that it looked correct. There was a bit of overhang from the second circle that I drew that sort of obscured the edge, and I just didn't like that. It probably would have been fine, honestly, but it was bothering me. So I took some time to fix it. Now I'm going through and I'm sort of describing what the central area is. I wanted there to be a bunch of cover. I never got around to actually doing that. I haven't actually released the map as I'm recording this, but I might go through before I'm done, and I might add in some crates. The problem is I ended up using some pretty big textures because I just like using big textures. It makes me happy to have that much detail, and I don't have that much space left in the file. For those of you who don't know, there's a 10 megabyte limit. There's a 10 megabyte limit for how large your map can be, and I'm at like 5.6. And I always make my maps huge. My maps have always been huge just because I use the biggest texture I can possibly find. And I don't know. It's I might go through and add some cover. I might not. I might get someone else to do it for me. I might just release this map as sort of an open source resource, if that makes sense. Just sort of, yeah, you can use the models as the way you want. You can use the skybox, or no, I can't use the skybox because I got it from the store. I paid for it. And yeah, well, you can use my models, you can use my textures, whatever. And of course, you can always use the knowledge. The knowledge that I give is really the most important part of the entire process. Right here, I wanted to go through and I wanted to sort of get really specific with how big this map was going to be. I threw that out the window immediately. I really did. I said I wanted it to be about 100 units square, and I spent a lot of time trying to get the labels to say 100 units square. And I didn't measure at all. I eyeballed it like I always do. And I'm not even sorry. I'm really not. Because at the end of the day, it's got to look good, right? You can make it as accurate as you want to be, but if it doesn't look good, then what's the point? Now right here, I guess the most blatant way to say this is that Pythagoras was not a nice man, and I have no idea how triangles work. Alright, so now we're moving into Maya finally, after we export this file as a PNG so that we can actually use it. Maya is my go-to program for 3D modeling. Blender is free, but the UI confuses me. I don't understand how to use it. So, yeah, I just don't. The only downside to Maya is that it takes absolutely forever to launch. I cut out, like, almost 15 minutes of waiting for it to launch. I have no idea. I have no idea why, but it does. But once you get it loaded, it performs really well. It does everything I need it to do. It's just a really useful program. It's easy to learn. It's easy to find what you want. Yeah, it's just really good. So if anyone needs help with Maya, and you've got the student version, you get the professional version, whatever, let me know, and I can help you out probably. Some general modeling tips I could also probably help you out if you wanted to do it in Blender, but I don't know Blender. The UI just boggles my mind. So right here, I just took that picture that I exported earlier and I put it onto a single plane that I sort of moved down and out of the world. I just wanted a reference. I wanted something that sort of like visibly showed me what I was trying to accomplish. So yeah, just put it on its own layer, make it a reference so that I can't click it, can't do anything with it. This is pretty basic stuff when you're doing work with a reference, is to put it on its own layer and make that layer a reference so that you can see it but you can't interact with it. Right here, I just extruded sort of around the circle. I made a wall basically so that I could extrude some of those faces up to make actual walls. I was gonna do just those 8 faces, but I decided that wasn't quite enough, so I added the other 4 on the sides, just to give it some sort of interesting, I don't know, geometry. Right about here, you'll see me struggle with making the roof. The roof has always been the biggest pain in this project. It gave me more than a couple errors when I was trying to do texturing, when I was trying to clean up the mesh near the end. And the very first thing I did was I counted the number of faces I had wrong, so I had to start all over again. But it wasn't too bad, but you know, it was a sign of things to come, I guess. A big problem I had, or a big concern I had when I was making this, was that I wanted to make sure that it didn't look like a mushroom. I wanted it to have a dome ceiling, but I didn't want it to look sort of mushroom-y. That would not have gone well. What I'm doing right here is I'm taking all of the faces that line up with the columns that I made earlier, and I'm sort of projecting them inward. I'm extruding them inward. What I want to do is sort of connect those new holes to those pillars, and hopefully that'll look okay. This process right here, where I'm going through and I'm connecting the pillars to the edges where the edges where those faces used to be. You'll see me do it a couple of times because I keep messing it up. That's one of the things that tends to happen with me is as I keep experimenting, as I have to redo sections that I've already done multiple times, I get really fast at doing it. Right about here, you'll see the next problem I had with my dome. When I extruded those faces inward, it created some new vertices, and they didn't scale quite right. They intersected each other, and it almost looks like they didn't scale uniformly, which is really strange. So I spend a while trying to fix that. Once I've got it roughly correct, I sort of leave it alone. I end up coming back to it later because there's an issue with some of the faces there that they aren't perfectly lined up, and they've got multiple faces connected to a single vertex. They've got too many faces connected to a single vertex, so I had to go through and I had to sort that out a lot later. It's something that came up when I was doing texturing. You have to do the mesh cleanup command when you're texturing in order to get it to lay out all the UVs properly. It wasn't doing the mesh cleanup command because something was wrong with the geometry, and when I tried to do mesh cleanup, it just sort of collapsed the entire model. It was really strange, so I had to sort that out later. You know, the problem that I had, I ended up solving sort of in a weird way, but we'll get to that one later, I guess. Because right now we're starting on the spawn sections. The spawn sections I wanted to do a little bit differently. I wanted them to sort of open up. I didn't want them to have a domed roof. I wanted them to be, you know, sort of open air. I also wanted them to be sort of conical, kind of egg-shaped, if that makes sense, but with a giant thruster at the bottom. So you see me delete the faces and then extrude some new ones. I just wanted a hole at the bottom. I didn't want them sort of connecting all at a single point. I wanted them to sort of be quads instead of triangles. The shape that you're seeing me make right here actually didn't change that much. Once I got that one done, I sort of called it a day, and I never really changed much about it because it worked. It looked all right. And it did what I needed it to do. So to do that, what I did was I hit Control D to duplicate the mesh. I moved it to where I wanted it to be, and then I inverted the scale. I changed the scale X to -1. What that does is it flips the entire mesh. So if you've got, you know, your right hand up and your left hand down, if you flip the mesh, it'll look like your left hand's up and your right hand is down. But the other thing that inverting that does is that it changes the normals to be backwards. So you'll see the mesh was black for a second. That's because basically outside, what the object considers to be the outside was pointing inward. So all the solid faces pointed inward, all the transparent faces were pointing outward. So I had to hit a button to reverse that. Right now you're seeing me doing some weird spirally thing. I did that sort of on accident. And I'm like, huh, that's a really cool idea. So so I just sort of went with it. And I thought, you know, maybe I can make those like copper pillars or something like that. Maybe I can have them just wrapping around as a decorative thing. So at this point, I'm just sort of going around and looking at it. I'm opening up Unity. I just wanted to make sure that it would work correctly in the engine. I wanted to put it in and, you know, see how it went. Unity has this thing where if you try and open a project while another project is already open, it just crashes. I don't know why that happens, but it does. So I just closed Unity, opened it again, and then switched to a different project. Maya has this pretty fun command called send to Unity. The first thing you have to do is set the correct Unity project, which is what I'm doing right now. And then I select everything I want, and I use send to Unity and put selection, and then I name the mesh, and it shows up directly in my project. So a part of the problem with Unity and Maya sort of coexisting is that their scales don't match up, and I haven't figured out exactly what to do to fix that. I know I have to change the model scale, in the import settings. I just don't know what I have to change it to, because I keep getting different results even with the same numbers, and I'm not sure why. Right here you can see me create a rigid body character controller. This is just something that I can use to walk around and sort of see how big the world is from a player's perspective. The rigid body is slightly it's slightly smaller than a player character, so I have to sort of correct for that in my head, but it's just it's a much faster process to sort of see what kind of size I'm dealing with in a way that I don't have to, like, you know, export the entire scene to Warmerize and then check it there and then go back to Unity. I can just sort of like enable the rigid body character controller and then play, and that's it. Right about now, I'm laying out the prefabs that are in the WM custom maps prefab. I'm laying out some of the children of that. At this point, I'm not really sure what I want to be doing, and I'm also not sure what I want to be deleting or not. I don't know what's supposed to be permanent, so I'm going to do what all of you should do if you ever have these kinds of questions. I'm going to go consult the manual. I'm going to go read. I'm going to go make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So once this eventually loads, I go through and I look at the list of selected components. I start looking through what needs to stay in the prefab, what can be deleted, and if there's anything that I can sort of get rid of to save space that I don't need to hide somewhere. Most of the stuff actually is deletable. A lot of the meshes you don't need. If you don't want them, you can just get rid of them, and that's super helpful, honestly. Next thing I do is make the death plane. I wanted it to be pretty close to the ground. I could have put it lower, and I could have put one on the ceiling, but I just decided not to. I wasn't really worried about people, you know, flying outside the map. If you want to right now, you could get in a jet, you could fly outside the death plane, and you can fly underneath it. But there's nothing down there, so there's really no point. I'm honestly not worried about it at all. The important thing is that if anyone falls off the side, that they die. That's what I really wanted to to accomplish with that, was that I just wanted a way to kill players if they made that mistake, so they weren't falling infinitely. But if you want to get in a jet and you want to fly off the side of the death plane, you can do that. It's a free world, man. You do what you want. So right about here, I'm going through and I'm labeling stuff in preparation for creating textures. This part was kind of a nightmare because, well, for one, creating textures for meshes that you've made is not an easy process. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of forethought. You've got to be thinking about what you want your texture to look like before you even start this process. And I only did some of that. I did not do any forethought at all, but I did use a lot of rational thinking. I tried to separate the meshes where it made sense. I sort of tried to you know, make sure that everything that shared a texture space. So if I have two pillars that are exactly the same, I tried to make sure that those shared the same space on the UV. You're allowed to have overlapping shells on a UV. They just both share the same pixels, if that makes sense. Which is actually, it can be a good thing. If you've got a big object with lots of duplicate faces, like if you've got, what's a good example? If you've got a cube, right? If you've got a cube and you've got 4 faces, all the side faces are all the same image, but the top and bottom are different, what you can do is you can have all 4 side faces occupy the exact same space on the texture, so then all 4 faces use just like so much less space than if each one had its own spot on the texture that was just the same thing. So it's a really good way to conserve space, actually, is to overlap identical UV shells if you can get away with it. It's tricky to do. It's tricky to do manually because Maya doesn't line up shells even if they look exactly the same. They don't line up like that. You have to sort of eyeball it and like kind of try and get it as close as you can by yourself. Right about here is the part where I start having really big issues and I start getting really frustrated. I'm trying to do mesh layout, which will take all of my shells and it will lay them out automatically in a way that the Maya thinks is efficient. And in order to do that, I have to use a command called mesh cleanup. And when I do mesh cleanup, it's actually deleting a couple of my faces because it thinks that the geometry on them is incorrect. So I have to sort of figure out what's incorrect about them and how to fix it. The key area that's giving me trouble is the top. And at the time, I was pretty sure that it was because I had those sort of like shielding panels going up, and that the roof itself was sort of a weird kind of extruded sphere. So I wasn't really sure what the problem was, but I was trying to fix it by making the shell a three-dimensional object rather than just a plane, or not a plane, but a sphere with nothing on the inside. If I'm 100% honest, I don't remember how I fixed it, but I did a couple of things near the top. I reduced a couple of those faces from triangles to quads because it was complaining that it had too many faces connected to a particular polygon. And then the other thing was that I redid all of the connections from the pillars to the roof itself, and I tried to do it right this time because maybe I messed it up. I'm not really sure. But this whole process took me, I think, about an hour, just trying to figure out what was wrong and how to fix it. You can see right there the top is kind of messed up. That's because of the mesh cleanup operation. It decided it wanted to change the top of my model to make it correct, quote unquote, what it thought was correct. So what I did was I reloaded the model from a time when I hadn't done the mesh cleanup, and I went through and I did it myself. So I had to go and redo all of the work that I did a minute ago before I reloaded, and now I have to go through and I have to fix the top myself. And as you can see, it's kind of a long process of just trial and error, just sort of seeing what the mesh cleanup is changing, trying to figure out why it's changing it. I keep using the wrong tool, which doesn't help at all. So finally I figure out the top, I think, and now it's just giving me the errors connecting to those armored plates near the near where the pillars and the dome connect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and select the entirety of the dome, and I'm going to try and convert it into a 3D object instead of a 2D object. And it's not going to go well for me for quite a few reasons, actually. So what I do is I extract those faces and I isolate them so that I can work with just those faces. I can sort of try and figure out what it is that I'm doing and how to fix it. And again, I spend quite a while on it just because, you know, I can't think of what else the problem would be. So I go through and I try and scale individual, you know, shells correctly. I try and move them so that they don't overlap in the weird way that they are. I try and change the scaling mode. Maybe that's the issue. It's just, it was going to be a long process trying to figure this out, so after a while of floundering, I come up with a different solution. First of all, see that space where all the faces are black? Those are inverted normals. So that's what I was talking about earlier. All the outside, everything that you're supposed to see is pointed inward, and everything you're not supposed to see, the negative normals, those are all pointing outward. So if you looked at it in game, it would be transparent unless you were on the inside of the mesh. So I had to go through and I had to fix that. right about here I had the solution that ended up working for me. What I did was I made a second sphere and I extruded a couple of faces outward on the bottom. And then what I did was I sort of inverted the normal so that it looked right, and then I made another sphere sort of inside the one I had before, and I just didn't connect it. So they're kind of just floating there, glued together, but they're not actually connected, if that makes sense. None of the new half sphere is actually touching, or is actually connected rather to the old sphere. They're just sort of in the same space. So it avoids all of the errors that mesh cleanup was giving me, and it allows me to have a shell on the inside that looks solid when you look at it. If you're inside the building, you can look up and see the roof. That's because of that sphere, or that half sphere rather. So at this point, I can finally start working on getting the textures sewed and moved into positions. So sometimes when you do the automatic UV generation, it'll give you every face, but it won't give them to you in a rational order. So what you have to do is go through yourself. You have to select all the faces that you want, and you have to sort of move them out of the way, cut the ones that are not supposed to be separate or are not supposed to be connected, and you have to move and sew the ones that are supposed to be connected. So what I ended up doing was I ended up taking each of those, what I said were copper like spirals that go around the outside. I ended up just sewing all of those together by hand. So that's what you'll see me do for the next couple of minutes, is take them, sew them, and then do what's it called, shell layout or something like that, where I go through and it scales them in the way that it looks in the world. So there's no distortion, there's no size issues, everything is proportional to where it's supposed to be in the world. Maya's really smart about figuring that out. It's just not very smart about laying it out automatically. This process can look pretty complex, especially because I'm working on kind of a weird mesh, and I'm doing it at 3x speed. But honestly, if you imagine putting a cube onto a UV map, if you've got 6 faces on a texture, right? You got one face that takes up a square on a 2D texture, and then you've got another face and another face. You get 6 total faces, all on the same texture. I'm doing the exact same thing to these faces as I would be to the faces on a cube. It's just a little weirder. It's the same concept, it's just a little weirder. Once you start to come to terms with more and more complex UVs, the whole system just starts to get really easy. It starts to make a lot more sense, I promise. But it never fully makes sense. Sometimes, you know, you make meshes that just find a way to surprise you every time. So at this point, I finished up all of those columns, or the wrapping copper tendrils, and I'm starting to work on the pillars. It took me a minute to figure out how I wanted to separate them all, but eventually I sort of decided that I want the outside to be one shell, and then I want all of the insides of the pillars to be sort of their own individual shells. Now I'm working on the underside of the dome. Spheres are hard. Spheres are really hard to get correctly. I think I ended up just leaving it alone, because while it wasn't perfect, it was, you know, it was pretty close actually. There wasn't too much distortion. The textures were all reasonably laid out. The ring needed to be changed, I think. So I got through that pretty quick, and then I started to move on to the upper part of the dome, the one that I made originally. This one was much harder because of those extrusions that I did earlier. It's got a lot of faces going in, quite frankly, weird directions. So you have to take those, you have to sew all of the what blatantly should be faces together, and you have to separate things that aren't supposed to be connected. So at this point, I'm pretty much done with it, so I use mesh layout, and I just go through and I make sure that everything's the way it's supposed to be. I make sure that there are no weird faces that aren't supposed to be there. I I go through and I select all of those, the thrusters on the bottom, and I sort of lay them out correctly. This is pretty much the last thing I have to do, I think, on this mesh before I can move on to the spawn platforms. So one final check, and I'm pretty sure I'm good to go. And now I can move on to creating the textures for the spawn platforms. So you remember earlier how I was talking about reusing UV space? So if you've got 4 sides of a cube that are exactly the same, you can put them in the same space. Well, another trick that you can use is if you've got multiple objects that are the exact same mesh, you can use the same UV space on all of them, even if they don't, you know, occupy the same space in the game, right? They can only use the same texture because they're the exact same mesh. And if you're doing game optimization, if you've got, you know, a size limitation like Warmorize does, you will very frequently find yourself trying to reuse meshes like this. So, as I'm recording this map is live. I have finished it. I said it wasn't released earlier. That was like 4 days ago that I recorded that. So a little insight into the video editing process there. But it's live now, and one of the things that I did was I used a ton of the same cube in the center area because I could get away with only using one 256 by 256 texture on that cube, and I could just reuse the same cube over and over and over again. But it didn't count any extra towards my total file size because I was still using the same texture. I was basically getting an extra cube for free. So that's one of the things that you should start to be doing as you make maps, is start to think about, okay, how can I reuse this asset in an interesting way without needing to, you know, make an entirely new texture for it, because honestly that's kind of a waste of your time and it's a waste of space. So at this point I have no idea how to copy my UVs from this object to a different object. So I have to go and Google it, and then I have to try it, see it fail, try and debug it myself because I have no idea why it failed. See all the UVs over on the right side, they're all kind of red and weird. So I go back over to Google and I'm like, alright, what did I do wrong? Turns out you have to set it to component mode, and it's like, alright, okay, let's change all the settings, let's try it again. Still didn't work. What's wrong? Check my messages, you know, do normal stuff that I do. And finally, I think I get back to work. I check a different thread, it gives me a different answer. I make sure that that answer works, and it does. I have the same UVs on all of my textures now. So now what I can do is unveil my secret weapon. This is how I make all of my textures. Well, most of them. Everything that I don't make myself, I find online. So like the crate that I mentioned, that texture I found online a while back. I used it in a different project, and I loved it. It was really, really cool. It was distinct. It was clear. It was really well made. So what I did was I reused that texture and I painted over it. Right? I took it into Photoshop. I added some text to it. I blurred the text. I sponged it a little bit. Sort of gave it a little bit of wearing, and then I put it into Unity and called it a day. But for everything that I don't get off the internet, I make myself in a program called Substance Painter. Substance Painter is glorious. I found it about 6 months ago or something like that. I was working on a project with some friends from college, and they suggested that I check out Substance Painter, and I watched a video on it, and it just blew my mind, the things that you can do with it. You can make professional looking textures just by clicking and dragging something and just changing some values. It was honestly just ridiculous. That texture you're seeing right now, by the way, the blue one with the black background, I made that myself. That gold one I did too. That was the first texture I ever made, and it's awful. But no, that blue and gray one I made myself as sort of an alien crystal. It's actually really robust. It works really well. So for this one, I decided that I wanted it to be dirty, right? I wanted it to be inspired by Elysia from Metroid Prime 3, which was this sort of ancient, broken down sky city with like copper pipes and rust and, you know, all kinds of dirt. So what I do is I play with the dirt level for a while. I want it to be sort of a really, really broad grunge. I don't want huge spots everywhere, but I do want, you know, a fairly even coating. I want a fairly even light coating, if that makes sense. I want it to be sort of like something that you would see on top of a layer of paint, which is what I end up doing next. Is I take the steel painted, I think it's a regular material. I change the color to be a little brighter. I desaturate it a lot. I ended up getting a really good color in the end. The desaturated blue is one of my favorite colors I've ever made. I'm gonna have to save that swatch and use it in future projects because it's just a really, really good, neutral blue. Yeah, so right there I pretty much nailed in what I'm gonna have for the final version of the dirt. It's sort of, it's not heavy, it's not thick, but it's evenly distributed, if that makes sense. So at this point I'm sort of playing with some of the physics brushes, which is something that Substance Painter can do. I want to sort of make some black scoring on it. I know that it's probably not going to show up on the final texture, but I want to put it in there anyway, just because I think it's cool. Always make sure you save your work. That's always a good thing to do frequently, because you never know when you've got, you know, 5 different programs open. You've got Unity, you've got Maya, you've got Substance, you've got... Oh, look at that, it crashed. Hey, look at that, perfect timing. Yeah, you've got Unity, you've got Maya, you've got Chrome, you've got, you know, a whole bunch of different things open. Things can crash, things can run out of RAM. So, make sure you're saving your work. Substance Painter has an autosave feature. It's not on by default, but you can turn it on. So I just go back and I pick one of the smart brushes, and I think I like that one. It sort of looks like dust has sort of dripped down as people have tried to clean it or something like that. So obviously I don't want white, I want black, I want some, you know, I want some engine scoring. I go over the entire outside, I sort of make sure that everything looks sort of evenly worn. Again, I know this probably isn't going to show up too well on the final texture, but I'm going to do it anyway, just because I enjoy doing it. The physics brush is something that I don't get to play with very often. Getting the inside was kind of tricky because it is a physics brush, so it does, it tries to, you know, it tries to simulate what would happen if a particle hit it and then fell, if that makes sense. So if you look at it from a weird angle, the particle won't fall correctly, and it won't come out right in the texture. So I had to get up there in a weird angle and sort of paint it from that angle. So moving on to the rest of this now, I wanted a stripe. I knew that just having the whole thing be blue would be kind of boring, so I added a stripe. I think I ended up inverting it so that it was a white stripe on mostly blue. Yeah, you can see again the dirt there. It's not super thick, but it is kind of spread out and everywhere. Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, so I change things to pink sometimes when I when I know that I'm gonna need to find faces later. If I know that I have a project where I'm going to sort of need to figure out where any untextured face is, I'll make a material. I'll try to make it bright pink so that I can easily find it and I can fix it later. So I have a preset set up specifically for Warmer Eyes already. It outputs an RGB alpha file and a normal file. The normal file doesn't often contain a bunch of information, so I tend to turn it off a lot of the times inside Unity just because it doesn't do anything really. Normal files are great, by the way, but you've got to make sure that if they don't do a ton, then there's really no reason to use them, if that makes sense. So I used basically the same material for the orange base. I just changed the color of the paint on the steel. I also have a ton of messages because I had just come back from work and I needed to check all of those. I recorded this whole thing over the course of like 4 days or something like that, maybe 5. At this point, I needed to look up exactly what color the orange of players were, because the orange that I was getting was kind of brown. It's still kind of brown, but it's less brown now. It's not quite as, it's a little more desaturated, I think. After I looked up the reference, it was a little more desaturated. So now I can go through, I can find the meshes that need to be colored, and I create a new material for each one. I create a blue one, I create a red one, I change them to Legacy, and I think I used bumped specular because, or no, not bumped specular, bumped diffuse, because diffuse is the RGBA file, and the bump map is just the normal map. It's what bump maps used to be called before they were called normal maps. Normal maps, by the way, are awesome. What they do basically is they talk to the engine, right? The engine says there is a photon of light coming from the light source and it hits the texture, right? Normally it just sort of like scatters uniformly off, but with a normal map you can say, all right, if it hits this spot on this texture, it doesn't bounce, you know, it doesn't bounce uniformly. It's sort of, it can bounce towards the camera a little bit more. The brighter, the light will look a little brighter. It bounces away from the camera. The section of texture will look darker. It basically just is a layer of height on your texture, but in 2D. Normal maps are really, really cool. They've been around forever, but every time I think about how they work, it's just really, really crazy. So at this point, some of my textures are wonky. I'm pretty sure that's because I never actually exported them from Maya into Unity. So I have to go through and I have to fix that later. But for now, I'm just sort of sanity checking, making sure everything looks good. The next thing on my list eventually is to do the texture for the center. I want to do that after I sort out some of the issues from this one. So right now I wanted to make a material inside of Maya using Hypershade to sort of see what my meshes were looking like inside of Maya, to see if it was a Unity problem or if it was a Maya problem. So I go through and I set up the material to use the exact same textures that I just made in Substance Painter, and I put them onto the appropriate models in Maya. I do the same thing for the blue material, you know, assign the texture, assign the material to the mesh, and I look for any problems that show up. So at this point there is a weird thing where in the floor, basically where the players spawn, on some of them it's just sort of, you know, weirdly stretched, and so I have to try and figure out why that's happening. And I think at some point I'm like, you know, I don't know why any of this is happening, so I'm just gonna delete it, copy over a different one just like that, and then just scale it in a -1 in the Z or something like that. Check to make sure that it looks correct, and I'm pretty sure it does. So I do the same thing over in the orange one. The two that were misbehaving, I just deleted them and replaced them with the correct version. So with that out of the way, we can start labeling all of our stuff. We can start thinking about making a texture for the center. The center can't be red or blue, obviously, so I'm thinking white. White's a pretty neutral color. I'm gonna have to make sure that it isn't, like, you know, too sterile of a white. If it's too sterile, then it just sort of looks boring. First things first, let's just try a bunch of stuff on. Substance Painter has a bunch of pre-made materials that you can just throw on there and modify. So I play with a couple for a while. I never really found one that I liked except for that copper. I changed that copper to sort of a more orange. I apply a layer of dirt over it. I need to change the dirt just like I did for the spawn to make it more uniform but less intense. So there's a just sort of fine layer of dirt over the top. The look I have right now is, it almost looks like a penny, that sort of copper. So they did a really good job making that that preset. If I had more time, I would probably spend more time on the textures of the center, because honestly I think it's the weakest of the entire map. The copper on the bottom looks kind of, it's cool, but there's not enough noise there to make it interesting. I need more detail on it. And the white that I end up with on the walls of the outside are just, it's too plain, and I don't really care for the shade of white. I wish I had some sort of color or something. Having stuff on the inside helps, but I'd love to like add, you know, big scorch marks from where it had survived an impact from a large laser cannon or something like that. Maybe some bullet holes on the side that are permanent, and see if I can add some more detail. You know, I want to make it interesting. I want to tell a story with the map. Like I wrote a bunch of lore for this map in my forum post, and like honestly, I wish I had expressed more of it in the textures. But unfortunately, I made the textures and then I wrote the lore. So you know, it looks okay. It looks pretty good. I'm happy with how it came out, but I wish it had came out better, if that makes any sort of sense. This was me being really stupid, by the way. Substance Painter has a thing where you can select an object by its UV shell, and I wasn't using that. Instead of selecting an entire shell, I was selecting every individual face on that shell, and that's slow, it's boring, and it's not as efficient as using, you know, a shortcut like that. So at this point, I've accidentally pulled off one of my windows, and I don't know how to get it back. So I just sort of like, I go through the menus for a minute, try and figure it out, and then I just leave it, because I just don't know. But other than that, yeah, I'm just going through and I'm coloring over most of the roof manually. I can't sort of highlight it. I can't highlight the roof because it'll also get some of the other pieces, and I don't want that to happen. Yeah, see that window came off, and I don't know where it was, so I'm like figuring out trying to put it back, but it just won't go until eventually I get it. So at this point I'm playing with sort of the edge wear effect. If you notice, the edge has sort of metal on it. You can change how much metal is shown, how far out it goes, what texture you want to use to decide where the metal is shown and isn't. I try and I go through and erase that line right there, but I couldn't end up doing it, so I think I just let it be and sort of like, you know, it looks okay. It looks alright. I changed the metal underneath to be a copper. I try and match that copper with the copper on the bottom. It's a little off, but it's pretty close. I think I do the same on the top, actually, as well. And I think I make it a lot more intense on the top because, you know, if there's any sort of attack, or if there's any sort of, like, weather, even if it's, I guess it's orbital, so there's probably not much weather, but, you know, ice and dust from space can hit it from the atmosphere, and just solar damage, right? Just the solar wind's hitting this thing enough, it'll probably, you know, it'll probably do some damage to the ceiling. So I wanted to make sure that the ceiling looked a little more worn than than the walls. At this point, I'm pretty happy with it. I don't know how I feel yet at this point about how the roof is, but I changed it to a little bit more of a yellow, like maybe it had faded. I still don't know how I feel about that. I changed the wall texture to match a little bit closer so that it's not as pasty, and I think, yeah, you know, all right, this looks pretty all right. So I go and I export it, I select the Warmerize preset, it's got, you know, all the files I need, I go over to Unity, they show up in Unity. Now I need to create a new material, I need to set it to a Lambert, or not a Lambert, sorry, I need to set it to Legacy shader. I also bring over the reference, just to make sure that I'm doing the map right, just to make sure that, you know, I'm putting the bases in the right spot, and then I delete it once I know what I'm doing. That was me checking OBS just to make sure it worked. I didn't want to have to have been recording for the last couple hours and just, you know, have nothing be there. So that's it. That's all 3 textures in. And now if I want to, I can go through and I can change all of the textures that I have. I can re-export them, put them back in the file where they belong, and I can get those files to update. Just like that. So at this point I also put in a skybox. I'm not sure when that happened, but it definitely happened. The skybox is one of the few things that I didn't make. I bought it. I bought a pack of skyboxes from the asset store. This one was like $7 or something like that, and it comes with a ton of 4K skyboxes, which is really great. This particular one, however, is in a cube map format. Warmerize doesn't support cube maps because Unity doesn't export them well to the format that the custom maps use. So what I had to do was I had to create an empty scene, right, with nothing in it. I applied the skybox to the scene, and then I created a camera. I had that camera be 90 degrees FOV, and I had it be 1000 by 1000 resolution, right? Actually, I think I had it 2000 by 2000. So what I did was I took a picture from the front, the back, the left, the right, and the up and the down, and I used all 6 of those files, all 6 of those images, to make a 6-sided skybox shader, which is something that Warmerize does support. I had to figure that out. With the help of Max. If you want the script for it, by the way, let me know, and I will send you the script for it. So if you've got something that's in a cube map material, and you want it to be 6-sided so you can use it in Warmerize, let me know. I know how to convert those. It's actually not even that hard, honestly. So at this point, I'm trying to make a font in Maya, or not Maya. I'm trying to use a font in Maya to make 3D text, and I'm trying to come up with a good way to preview the font, because Maya's preview kind of sucks because you have to select the font that you want to check, wait for the thing to render, click on the thing that's rendered, and then change the thing again if you want to look at the next one. You can't just like press the down arrow and see a new one. So it just it took a really long time to do, and once I found the right font, I was pretty happy with it. Also, as it turns out, if you try and use Bullet Campus, which I do right about now, it takes so long to render that font in Maya that the entire menu will freeze if you try and do it. So I had to like switch the language from any to, I think I switched it to Arabic or Italic, or no, I think I did Hebrew. I don't remember. Might have been Latin. It was a couple of different languages that I tried until I finally got it, and then I just avoided Bullet Campus at all costs. And then once I got this to render in my normal video font, I'm like, you know what? I'm not changing it anymore. I'm good. I save it as Outpost, and then I decide I want to add myself as a credit. So I create a new text object, I go through, and I add the text that I want it to be. Fun fact, if you're using this and you have a bug where you have to press undo twice to get it to actually undo, you also have to press every single letter in the text box twice. So if you want to type A, you have to type A, and on the second time you press A, it'll actually type. So it was AA space space MM AA PP space space, and it was just you had to do that for every single letter. It was really annoying, but I got it. I got both of them exported into Unity correctly. I grouped them together and under a blank game object, and then I sort of put them up above the map. And at this point, I noticed that the text is all kinds of messed up. But I'm like, alright, you know what? I'll deal with it later. Because honestly, it's kind of cool. I like the way the P rendered. I like the way the O rendered. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's weird, but it's cool. I bring the multiplayer menu up from the Warmrise thing, and then I put it at sort of an angle. I sort of eyeball it just to make sure that it looks okay. There's really no good way to tell, and that's one of the frustrating things about the custom map system, is that there's no good way to tell what the multiplayer menu is going to look like before you actually put it in the game. It looks okay in engine. It's not perfect, but you know, it's okay. At this point, I'm starting to lay out all of the rest of the spawn items. The map is starting to be ready to be played. It's starting to be ready to be functional, at least. The last thing I have to do is to create the walkways between the maps, and to create some cover in the central area. I don't think I recorded me making the cover, because honestly, I just took a texture, I applied it to a default Unity cube, and I placed it in a bunch of places. It isn't that hard. People who make maps much worse than this have done this, you know, ad infinitum. I don't think I really need to cover it. The other interesting thing that's on there is that I added an advertisement for the Warmrise Discord server, discord.me/Warmrise. You should all join it, by the way. We, in the Discord server, the sort of the helper and hire roles, we had this huge discussion with, you know, how do we get more people into the server? How do we get a more active, you know, player base? How do we get more competition? Well, the answer was to start creating a Discord server that was active. By being active ourselves, by getting people to join the server who are active, by just sort of getting the word out that we exist, instead of just like occasionally sharing the link on the homepage or on the forums. We decided, you know what, let's put an ad for it in the custom map system. Let's make a prefab that anyone can drop into their custom maps, existing or brand new, and they can just say, hey, we're all on the Warmrise Discord server, you should come join us because it's a fun place to be. And I'm like, you know what, that sounds like a noble goal, I will make that for you guys. And so I did. I went through and I textured everything, I modeled it, I put through a couple of concepts to the guys over in the sort of admin channels in that server, and about a week later we had a working advertisement. Tried to get it animated, but animations aren't supported yet, so that'll be coming later, hopefully anyway. At this point I was trying to figure out the skybox issue. Couldn't get the source lighting from the skybox to work correctly, so I ended up making a gradient that I thought looked similar. It kinda does. It's a little bright, it's a little orange. I wish I could tone that down a bit. But you know, it doesn't look awful. It's definitely going for the right color. It's not like green or anything like that. I'm going through all of the checklists at the end of the document. I'm sort of like looking for things that might be wrong. I obviously skipped the platforms just because I wanted to get the thing into the game to test it. I wanted to make sure that it would load and it would work. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't like at 14 megabytes or something stupid like that, which I have been known to do. And at this point I noticed my skybox is broken. Yay! But yeah, so I play around on this for a bit. I try and get to the center. As it turns out, you can if you use your gravity twice, but now that there's platforms, you don't really need to do that. The other thing that I do is I get over to the center, I get the jet, and I fly around for a bit. I fly up to the roof of the center building. I fly underneath. That was fun. Yeah, I fly up to the roof and I find that sort of face where you can sort of sit behind it and be invincible, but it kills me. So I'm like, alright, you know, I think Max said something about if you're behind a face, if you're basically inside an object, the game will detect that and it'll kill you. So I just kind of left it alone. Like 6 hours or something like that after I released the map, someone had reported that to me already, that you could get up there. So, you know, props to Sun69 for finding that really quickly. And I ended up fixing that bug, so you can't do that anymore. So At this point, I think I upped the texture resolution a bit. I export the map again just to make sure it looks good. I think I had it at 1K map for all 3 things. And then, because the file size was so low, I'm like, you know what, I can do 2K. I look around, 2K looks so much better. It's so much more detailed. So I'm like, alright, cool. I leave, and I start researching how to do 6-sided skyboxes. Like I said, the solution is to use a script to capture to capture the skybox that you have from a couple of different angles, top down, or top, bottom, front, back, left, and right. You have to capture all of those. But I didn't know that at the time, and I had to message Max about it. And I think I actually show me messaging Max about it in this one, because honestly, I couldn't figure it out. It was driving me insane. I mess around with using a procedural. It doesn't look right. I can't get it to do exactly what I want it to do. So I get rid of it. I go back to the planetary system that I had, or the planetary baron that I had, and I just sort of like, you know, I don't even know what to do at this point. This is the kind of thing that happens when you're making a map that really pushes things, is that you run into blocks that no one's ever really had to see before. There's no guides on the forums because no one's really had the issue yet. And that was really, honestly, kind of humbling, that I was the first one to come across this issue, and I was the first person to solve it. And now I'm trying to help other people who might have this issue in the future if anyone tries to do something this ridiculous ever again. Up above, in the very top, you can kind of see the preview of what I was working on right there with the spinning rings. That's going to happen as soon as animation gets implemented, I think. But yeah, the vote was pretty overwhelmingly obvious for the one that I'm showing right now. And it looks even better textured, but you'll have to see that in the map, I think. So some more of me playing with the skybox. At some point, I don't know if it happens in this section now, but at some point I figure out that, hey, I actually have some skyboxes that are all 6-sided. They don't look very good, but I have them. I open up one of the demo scenes that came with the skybox pack and just sort of like open it up and have a look at it. Not really for any purpose, just kind of out of curiosity. This is the one that I was using for a while. This is a 6-sided skybox. It's called Flare Sun or something like that. Flare Sun was what I was using as sort of a backup, because it looked pretty similar. The color wasn't quite right. It was more red and less kind of like yellow-green, and I kind of like that. So if I hadn't solved my problem, this is the skybox I would have used, because it was a 6-sided skybox. It would have worked, you know, adequately. I wouldn't have liked it, but it would work. So at this point, I've got a bunch of errors when I try and export. That's mostly from the textures. They're all the textures were all DXT1, I think. No, they had to be converted to DXT1. I don't remember what the textures were, but they had a compression issue that they weren't supported by the exporter. Also, that's a really nice sunset. That was really good. Megasun's great. I need to go through and I need to like look at all of these skyboxes at some point. I haven't actually done that yet. I went straight for planetary because I knew that's what I wanted. Yeah, a lot of the rest of the video is me sort of floundering, trying to figure out what my issue is. And honestly, that's the second half of my creative process, is sort of once I hit that sort of boundary where I don't know how to fix the problems that I'm having, but I really want to fix the problems, so I just sort of like attack it for a really long time, just sort of guessing at what I need to do. So this right here is the process I was talking about earlier. This is where I took a camera and I took a screenshot of all 6 sides at 90-degree rotation angles, basically. So, you know, again, top, bottom, front, back, left, right. Took a picture of all 6 of those sides, and then I stitched them together into a new 6-sided skybox shader. Again, I have the script for this. If anybody wants it, please let me know. I will get it to you, no problem. I'll teach you how to use it. Not a big deal at all. I'll even help you sort out which tile is which and how to apply it to the skybox. Like, this is a problem that I worked for a couple hours to solve, so if anyone wants the solution, I will give it to you, no problem. At this point I'm going through and I'm labeling everything. I labeled a couple of them incorrectly because I wasn't paying that much attention. I also think I had a duplicate at some point because again I wasn't paying attention. You can see the skybox assembling as I put the textures in on the right hand side, and I think that's really cool. And then I clicked the wrong thing and it died. You can see some of the seams, also the fact that I have two suns. Yeah, that's how I knew I had messed something up. So I go through and I double check that I've got the correct texture assigned to each respective face, and then I go through and I replace one of the textures that I knew was broken. So I go through, I change what needs to be changed, check the material, and aside from the fact that I have two suns, now I don't, works perfectly. Not a problem in the slightest. So at this point I can export the map again and I can test it in Warmerize and see if it works. So open up the Play Now page. Upload the map, and it works. Look at that, perfect. So spawn in, and I noticed there are some black seams where the sides of the textures meet. That's unacceptable. I can't have that. I worked way too hard for there to be seams. So I look at them for a bit, I cry a little, and I Google it. That's my solution to most of my problems. Turns out the first thread I found on Google was the solution. You need to change the texture modes, change all of them to clamp on their wrapping mode, and that solves all of the issues. It's perfect. Export it out, test it in Engine, and no more lines. Perfect. You can still see where they intersect, but only if you're looking for it. If you're not looking for it, then it's really hard to tell. So yeah, that works great. I went ahead and I uploaded the map just to see what kind of size I was looking at, see how long it would take to upload. I also named it. So I think at this point it was too large. I don't remember what I did to fix that. I also had a couple of the Murder Inc. members do a pre-test on this, and I told them I would pay them actual real money if they could figure out how to get from one of the spawn platforms to the center without using a gravity gun, because Captain Joseph didn't own one. So he was like, "How are you supposed to do this?" And I'm like, "You're not, because I haven't put in the platforms yet." He's like, "I'm gonna find a way." And I'm like, "If you find a way, I will pay you money." And he never found a way. Going through and doing some cleanup. This map's getting, pretty close to release, so I want to make sure that everything's labeled correctly. I dropped down the resolution on the skybox textures because they're all 2K. I could probably drop them down even farther than they are right now and it'd be alright, but I really don't want to. The skybox already looks kind of pixely the way it is. At this point, while it's doing things, I kind of get curious. I look at the documentation for doors. I don't think I'm going to use doors in this one, but I might use doors in the next one that I'm doing. Spoiler alert, I'm doing another one, and it's going to be different. It's going to be very different. So, we might see doors. I'm going to have to play with whether or not you can open them diagonally, because if you can, that's going to be amazing. I also want to see if you can get multiple doors in the same space and have that work correctly, because if I can get sort of a double-sided door, that would be awesome. So at this point, I need to make the bridges. It needs to happen. It's the only thing that's really stopping me. I didn't do it until now because I didn't want to download Pro Builder, just because it's a big file and my internet's 800 kilobits on a good day. So as it turns out, I already had Pro Builder downloaded, so I just had to install the thing, which still took a minute. I create a cube. I position it pretty much exactly where I want. I turn on the Pro Builder windows. And the dimensions overlay. I turn that off later because it gets annoying, but it's pretty cool for a minute. So at this point, I'm just extruding the faces where I need them to be, making a bridge. It's really, really simple. This is really basic stuff. At this point I do something a little tricky, but even then it's just I extrude them both out one. It's not that big of a deal. And then I grab the center plate basically, that center face. I drag it up. I'm like, nope, that looks stupid. I drag it down. I'm like, that looks less stupid. So I leave it at that. At some point in the near future, I'm going to realize that I didn't position the islands correctly. They aren't perfectly square, and they're not. The center isn't perfectly in the center. So I'm gonna have to make each bridge individually, basically. It's not too hard once you make the first one to just sort of like expand the entire thing and just like duplicate it, change it a little bit, and duplicate it and change it a little bit for each ramp. But I just think it's funny that I specifically gave dimensions in my blueprint and I completely ignored them. Yeah, so I grab the edges of each thing and I drag them to the corners of each of the doorways, basically. So it makes this sort of rhombus shape, I guess. That's not a rhombus. It's not a square. I don't know what the shape is, but it's a four-sided object. At this point, I tried to scale it inward, like I did with the spawn islands, and that does not work. It just sort of flips it, and it doesn't do it in a way that I want. Duplicate both of those, try and scale them again, doesn't work. Alright, fine, rotate it, do it manually. Right here, right there was the moment that I noticed that everything was wrong. So I go through, and I have to do each one manually, which is fine, because I had already done the previous two, so I already had a lot of practice. It wasn't awful, it was just kind of annoying to have to do. And the bridge you can just kind of duplicate, it's not a big deal. But the size is wrong because, of course, the islands are different distances from each other. Why would they be, you know, a square like I designed them to be? So at this point, that's pretty much the entire thing done. I threw a texture that I had spare, one that I made, onto the ramps. But other than that, pretty much the only thing left is the crates. So let's go ahead and let's go check that out, actually.